There's a movement brewing, and that movement is the Me Total lifestyle.
It centers around you keeping your sense of self intact and in gaining clarity of purpose as you age. I'm Carrie.
I'm Joe.
I'm JM.
And we're on a mission to show you how to enjoy friends, fellowship, and life without substance dependence.
It's time to discover how you can begin living a Me Total lifestyle.
Right here on the FUZZEE'ish podcast. Let's go.
Welcome to the FUZZEE'ish podcast. I'm your host, Joey Q, and with me are JMG and Carrie Human as always. I've got the boys back together. We've got a really interesting episode today. Dai Manuel. Don't change the podcast dials. You want to watch this show. Okay, gentlemen, we've got an interesting guest for today's show, Dai Manuel. Super interesting guy. He's been all over the world. He's a coach that gets into, coaching people into their health journey and stuff like that. What do you think our listeners are going to take away from this conversation we had with Dai today?
I mean, I feel like at the end of the day, Dai's just got incredible energy. I think they're just going to realize again that regardless of where you are on the journey, you got to start somewhere. And I feel like with Dai, he was down and he found his way out. I think the listeners are going to be really inspired by his story.
Yeah, man, what a profound amount of energy. And I learned that Dai is Welsh for David. Didn't know that until the end of the interview. But I agree, Carrie. I think that just starting somewhere, but also I think the thing that really resonated for me is the fact that all the changes that he's made in his life or helped others to implement in their own, they all start with making that decision for yourself, which centers back to a lot of what we talk about on this show. Also really loved the 2% podcast that he's about to push out. It sounds really similar to a lot of the things that we think about here. And so just exciting to hear the world starting to change in the directions that we're all so interested in.
Well, listeners, I know many of you have sat in your beds late at night and you've opened up Zillow and you've cheated on your zip code and you've thought to yourself, I wonder what my life would look like if I lived somewhere else, and you just punch in somewhere else. So I did that. That's how I went up in Tennessee, right? And I cheated on LA and I wound up in Tennessee. But Dai and his wife decided to actually move across the world. They didn't do it using Zillow, but I think you'll find that his story, his trajectory, his story about making their way back to North America and how they're helping people is very interesting. And I love the dynamic between Dai and his wife and how she supported him throughout their journey. I think it's very, very keen insight into the way functional relationships can work. And she gave him the adequate amount of space for him to open up and be vulnerable in the right ways. And I think that's so clutch. So ladies, gentlemen, do a solid for your spouses and listen to this episode. I don't think you'll regret it. Dai Manuel is a super dad dating his wife with a lead-by-example way of living and contagious personality who is on a mission to positively impact 1 million role models around the globe to lead a functionally fit life through education, encouragement, and community. He is an award-winning digital thought leader and author, distinguished Toastmaster and keynote speaker, former partner and chief operating officer of a multi-million-dollar retail company, and a sought-after lifestyle mentor and executive performance coach. Dai knows the struggle of the juggle and keeping his health and happiness a priority. He models his work based on the 5 F's: fitness, family, faith, finances, with an overarching roof of fun, built on a rock-solid foundation of health. Nuggets of wisdom and inspiration to take action to be your best self are guaranteed when you connect with Dai. So let's dive right into it. Let's do a little bit more of a linear format here so we can kind of, give the listeners a little bit of a journey here. I do want to dwell a little bit on when you decided to quit drinking alcohol, but
sure,
let's rewind back, I guess, what is it, like 20, 25 years, and talk about like the formative years of becoming Dai the man, and start us on that journey. What was going on in the earlier parts of your life? Like, getting into your career, meeting your wife, all that kind of stuff. We'll start there and then we'll dive into some of those topics. So start from that point.
Cool. Well, thanks, Joey. Just to give a little bit of context as well, when you think about how we all learn and form a lot of belief systems, right? It's often through modeling and mentorship, right?
Mhm.
Like, I think we either model other people that we associate with, we hang out with, we watch, whether it's a mentor or coach, or, we're very good at watching what to do and then trying to do it ourselves. But also there's that modeling aspect of just, I don't know, try and try again. Right. And when I think back at age 9, my parents separated and divorced, which sort of put me on a bit of a tailspin, because I've been dating myself now as a kid of the 80s. Right. So right around that time, it was early 80s when my parents separated and divorced. There wasn't any resources. Plus, I mean, we didn't have an internet, and there wasn't a lot of other parents that were separated. Like in my class of 30 kids, there's only one other classmate of mine that didn't have his original parents together. So there was a lot of stigmatization around that. And so those are some of those earlier formative years, because the next 5 years after that, I was self-medicating. And what I mean by that, I was eating a lot of unhealthy foods, playing video games, watching movies, very inactive. And by 15, I was morbidly obese. At that which point, I just, one day woke up, and I won't go into the whole details, but I just came to a moment where it was hurting me more not to change than to change. And I was finally ready to start doing something. And it, took me 6 years to get to my heaviest, but it took me about under 2 years to release that weight and to develop a new healthy lifestyle. That's what kickstarted me into coaching and mentorship, but also fitness, because going through that physical transformation myself, obviously people were watching, observing that change, and even friends of my parents coming to our house and, hearing me at 17 years old, like, what, you want to talk to me? Like, really? I have something of value to offer. And, and they were very complimentary. And that's sort of what kickstarted me into my 20s, working as a personal trainer, as a coach.
We actually share that in common. So I was 300 pounds at age 18 and 160 pounds by 21. And JM actually has an interesting story he'll get into, not nearly as kind of severe, but weight loss was key to his journey with coming to sobriety, or coming to me total and kicking the bottle. So yeah, please continue. But I just want to let you know you're in good company here.
Thank you.
I didn't turn out to be a fitness coach, but
well,
neither of our jaws are as chiseled as his either. So we got to keep going. Yeah, exactly.
It's my mom's jawline, which is funny.
Hair and
most
jaws.
People think I get it from my dad, but it's
jealous.
my mom's.
Yeah, I'm jealous. I'm jealous of both, man.
Well, thanks. That's too kind. Listen, in my 20s, I moved from Toronto to Vancouver, because I also wanted to escape. I was 18, I graduated high school, and I was like, peace, I'm out. Because I found, growing up in a small town, there was a lot of, let's just say, a lot of my social network, they still always associated me as that obese kid. Even like a lot of the girls that were my age, like it was funny, but I just wasn't readily accepted. And I was always in the friend zone, and I was like, what? Right. I want to reinvent myself. I want to be somebody who I believe I want to be, and unfortunately I wasn't really well formed around that concept of what my values were, because I didn't really understand where I was at. I mean, my main motivation for losing the weight was I wanted a girlfriend. Okay.
Sure.
I did. I wanted
another
somebody to want me. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we all want that. We want that attention, that validation, that little bit of an ego boost, right? That idea that we have somebody that wants us romantically.
We got needs, man. We got needs.
Do we ever?
Let's go. Yeah.
Remember. But then I got into training. And I realized very quickly that, holy crap, this is really hard to sustain not only a healthy lifestyle, but hours for dollars is really problematic. Right. And I figured that out pretty quick in my early 20s. I was like, man, I don't know how I'm going to have a lifestyle here, because it's taking me, about 14 to 15 hours a day to only bill for 6 to 7 hours. Because, as a trainer, we sort of have to work when our clients are able to work. So it's early morning, maybe a nooner, and then after work in the evening. So it was very challenging. And, but then
nothing like a nooner though.
Well, yeah. Wait, what kind of nooner are we talking about?
I don't know. But I just like that word.
It's very Canadian. But in my early 20s, I happened into a fitness equipment store. And this is a little funny side note. I went in to buy a heavy bag, from this national fitness chain here. And it's sort of similar to, Dick's Sporting Goods you have down south there. Yeah. So similar to that, but it's more specialty, just fitness. And so they have this great fitness equipment retailer. I went in to buy a heavy bag. The manager started talking to me and could tell that I was somebody that was young. I was excited. She could tell that I was very passionate about fitness and talking about it. She's like, hey, have you ever thought about working in a place like this? And I'm like, No, tell me about it. She goes, well, here's the deal. And she went on to explain that, yeah. And I had to basically ask her, I was like, so you're telling me if I help people buy the right product to give them the best results and really support them with that, and the more people I help, the more money you're going to pay me? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, well, can I start tomorrow? Because it was my first taste of performance-based pay. And I realized there was no income cap, and I just excelled at it. Within 18 months, I was making as much as a junior lawyer, as a new teacher. So I was like, well, I'm not going to finish my degree. Because I was thinking of being a lawyer or a teacher, once I got my degree, and I was like, oh, I don't want to do that now. I want to stay in fitness. And I think I can actually do really well doing this. And fast forward a few years later, I had an opportunity to form a joint venture partnership and form our own company, branching off from that national chain. And that was 17 years of my professional life. And I think this is the crux of where our conversation is really going to get interesting. And I'd love to hear your journeys as well, if time permits. But in my late teens there, around 17, I remember starting to get more social as I developed this new healthy lifestyle. I started getting invited to parties, and I'm sure Joey and JM, you have similar experiences with weight loss, because your confidence starts to go up, right? Mm-hmm. And when you're confident, you start to be more outgoing. Maybe you start to have more conversations, engaging. Either way, I started getting invited to parties, but I was very introverted, very shy. And as such, I remember the day being given my first beer. Mm-hmm. And my second, and then eventually a third. And I remember by that third drink, I was like talking to everybody. I mean, there's some girls there.
Let's go.
Looking at each other.
Yeah,
like,
elixir,
dude, seriously.
Elixir, yeah.
Seriously, though. Like, I mean, I know it's such a cliche, right? They talk about the liquid courage, but it was like instantaneous. And what was super interesting was I was getting so much validation. And I was starving for that. Like, I know that was really problematic for me. I was always concerned about what people thought about me, because I wasn't used to that. I was so used to it being very negative and seeing the snickering in the halls, the bullies picking on me. So this is very new. And I started getting invited to more social events because people liked the version of me when I was drinking. So very quickly, I started to realize that, wow, this is great. I'm becoming more social. I'm dating some girls. I have my first girlfriend. I'm like, wow, this is awesome. And I associated a lot of that success with alcohol. Mm-hmm. And I started to believe that people preferred hanging out with the drinking version of me than the sober version. That set in motion 15 years of me and drinking being very good bedside friends, and it was challenging because at the same time I'm scaling my first real business with a business partner. We're growing our chain of retail stores to 8 stores, B2B enterprise, e-com all across Canada. So it was an omni-channel business in the retail space. And it was great. I learned a lot, but at the same time, I had this other lifestyle. And I was meeting my wife, starting to have my kids in my mid-20s. And so when my drinking was at its peak, by my early 30s, that's when the wheels on the bus started falling off. I couldn't balance things any longer. And
is that the time when you decided to stop drinking in your early 30s, or was it much later?
Early 30s. Yeah. Around 32. Okay. Around 32. So it's about 14 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And it was largely due to, and my TEDx talk sort of talks about the story of what happened. So I'll give you sort of the quick overview of it. And really the point is, my wife sat me down to talk about what life was going to look like co-parenting our kids. She wasn't willing to have me in the house anymore. And this is after us being together for 10 years.
Wow.
It wasn't what I wanted. I mean, I loved my wife. I loved our life. I loved my kids. Both of them were under the age of 6 at the time, my daughters. And it was so far off the radar for me. It was, and I mean, and to say I was surprised, I was, but not really. Like, I mean, there comes a point where I knew that straw would break that camel's back, and surely it did. In that conversation, while we're both sobbing across this table, she asked me a very specific question. And I'm curious to know if you guys have had a similar realization when someone's asked you the right question at the right time, right? Under the right circumstances. And because everything can change in an instant. And my wife looked at me in the eyes and said, "Dai, are you being the type of man that you would want to marry your daughters?"
Profound.
And it was like instant. I was very triggered, to be honest with you guys. Like, I was so triggered at the time because I was rather bombastic. I was also extremely hungover at this moment when she was sharing this with me. And I got a bit on the back like I started backpedaling a bit, trying to defend myself. And all of a sudden I realized, what am I defending here? I really tried to see it from her perspective. And I realized I was the example to my kids at that moment of what a man is, what a father is, what a husband is, what a son is, a brother, like a business owner, a community leader. Like, and if that's what I'm showing is that, and I know that daughters, especially, I don't know how much you guys have gone into this, but I know that daughters often look for, we set the template, right? For
model,
what kind of men they end up
Totally.
looking for later on. And I realized that I didn't want that template to be what they ended up with.
Gotcha.
And
So
that's
you
what
were
started.
So at that point, you had reached a place in which you needed to make a change. Was making the change similar at all to how you were able to transform your body and get into health back in the day, or was it a completely different change?
I love that you asked that, because it was very similar. When I look back to the experience, at 15, I remember getting out of the shower one day, and I used to always turn the water on extra hot before I'd hop out of the shower, creating a lot of condensation, because this would cover the mirror with condensation. Like, it would be completely fogged over. So when I get out of the shower and when I was toweling off as that morbidly obese teen, even if I looked in the mirror, I wouldn't have to look at my reflection.
Wow.
Like, that was my hack. Like, I avoided, there's so few photos of me back then. I think there's two photos I have to prove. And like, one of them ended up in my book and it's on my website, because a lot of people are like, they meet me and they're like, yeah, right. And I got to dig out the one photo. Right. And because I avoided that. I avoided social settings. I isolated a lot, and alcohol brought me out of that, but what created other problems.
One thing that one thing we keep coming back to is, and it's clear you had the determination and had proven with the weight loss that you had the ability as a human to really sort of focus on this thing to get better. What do you say to the majority of the people listening to this who probably end up in as similar a scenario as the one you just talked about with your wife, where she says that and they don't have it? And so even though they have this profound statement and really this, you have got to change, they don't have it in them to make the change. I'm dealing with something personally right now with a family member who'd been sat down like that a number of times and is going to lose his battle with this terrible addiction. Those are the people we're really trying to get to. What do you share with those folks that aren't necessarily able to just capture it as quickly as I think even the group on this call have?
Wow, that's such a wonderful question, Jam. And I think back to some of the things I've had to work through, and it's not been easy. And I think that's the thing about change. Most of our relationship with change is not necessarily a positive one. When you think about a lot of changes that come our way, I often equate it to, you remember Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Sure.
1982 movie, right? Harrison Ford. The first 5 minutes of the movie is epic, right? It's very, very monumental. You see him there with his golden idol, and he's rushing out of this cave system, and he triggers a booby trap, and you have this massive boulder, like 10 times the size, barreling down at him, and he's just trying to outrun that. Well, this is a wonderful metaphor for change and how most of us experience it. Change is the boulder. We're Indiana, and that gold idol is whatever we've been working towards in our lives. Those big goals, those big ambitions, those milestone moments that we chase. And we hold on to it with dear life because we don't want to lose it. When life feels good, we want it to stay good. But we know, based on what Buddha said, like 2,300 years ago, there's only one thing we know for certain. Nothing's permanent. The universe itself is impermanent. So this idea of change, if we accept it, and we accept that things don't stay as they are, I think we can start to be more positive in our involvement with change. But it doesn't make it any easier. But I can honestly say it's always worth it once you've reached the other side. And I try to remind people of that, because hope is such a powerful tool. I know it's an emotion, it's a position, it's a perspective, but more than that, it's that inner confidence and belief that something's possible.
And is that where so we always talk about having a mantra and something to tie back. I love the Raiders is that where the 5 F's came from too, is to be able to help people to sort of grasp those things in something more tangible and something more obviously in some ways motivational as well. Is that a fair assessment?
I think so. Like, a lot of the times, when you think about our own perspective on ourselves, like that self perspective, when we're not feeling good, like our health, like if our health, our body especially isn't feeling good, if we could deal with a lot of aches and pains, a lot of extra inflammation, because alcohol creates a lot of inflammation, especially in our joints.
Right.
Plus we retain water, which doesn't help things, so we feel a little bit heavier. Maybe our joints and our movement is somewhat cramped. Our sleeping patterns are going to be also depressed, plus our emotional regulation is all out of whack. Like this is all I'm not the expert on alcohol, but I know you can go out there and you can learn all this stuff. You guys speak to this stuff regularly and talk to people about this stuff all the time. But alcohol itself is very hard on our bodies. That's why we get drunk, is our bodies can't process it quick enough. So it creates this sort of overload in our body and we get this sort of inebriated state, and it's hard. And so when we're in that state, not feeling good about ourselves, it's really hard to believe that anything else is possible. And so for me, every time I've had a serious change in my life, I've just refocused on the feeling in my body, that awareness, that because I know when I'm feeling good in my body, I start to look at the world differently.
Real quick though, when you were, so you mentioned the analogy of steaming up the bathroom and fog getting on the mirror. And I know at first your experience with alcohol was a social elixir, got you involved in a more fun and interesting way. But eventually, after 10 or so years of drinking, did the alcohol also become the fog? Right? Like when you were going to the bottle, was it because you were trying to mask the fact that you had this underlying issue and that it took some of the pain away in some regard? Like you didn't like who you'd become almost?
Yeah. Well, I think I was disappointed because I never really crossed the chasm. And what I mean by that is, we grow up with certain ideals or maybe a vision or a belief of who we're, growing into or evolving into. We all did. I mean, as kids, as teenagers, we have these visions of what life's going to be like when we grow up, right? Maybe what kind of work, what kind of partners, what kind of things we'll be doing in our lives. But sometimes, and I actually would say probably most of the time, we don't ask ourselves, well, what are the beliefs that allowed us to become that individual? What are the values that we make non-negotiable in our lives that would be there to support that version of me? And I know I just ignored all that. I was very focused on professional development, personal development. Forget that. Like, what's that? Go in. Like, what are you talking about? Right? Like, I was very again, you have to recognize the people I was hanging out with at the time. This is their belief systems too. So I was just doing what all the other guys were doing that I was hanging out with and associating with. Drinking was normal. Talking about our wives when we were drinking and complaining about them, that was also normalized. Skipping out on work or turning my phone off and telling my wife, oh, I'm sorry, I'm home late, babe. It's 3 a.m. Oh yeah, I know I was supposed to be home at 11, but my phone died and this, and that. Like just the excuses, right? And that again was normalized. And for myself, with that change, I knew I could change, but it didn't hurt bad enough, Like, I think Les Brown's got a wonderful story where he talks about this dog, and this dog is sitting on a nail on a porch. And a young man comes up to this older man that's sitting beside his dog on this porch because the dog is incessantly crying and moaning and groaning. And this young guy being a dog lover is like looking at the old guy like, dude, what's wrong with your dog, man? Every time I walk by your house, he's out here and he's just crying all day long. And the old man looks at him and he goes, oh, don't worry about it. He's just sitting on a nail. The young guy's looking at the dog and looking at the old guy and like, huh? Well, why doesn't he just get off and move? And then the old guy looks at him. He says, boy, maybe it just doesn't hurt bad enough. That's always stuck with me because how many of us deal with that little ache or that normalized pain point, but it's become so normal, like it just doesn't hurt bad enough to want to make a change, to get off the nail, and
it's so true, especially with dogs, because dogs would never leave their owner, even if there's a nail, stuck to their leg.
Yeah. Speaking of pain, Dai, I'm just curious, there's a quote that's like, pain pushes us until our vision pulls us. And you talked about alcohol sort of being like liquid courage, kind of feeling like Hancock in the sense where you kind of feel like a superhero once you got the booze in your system. And I'm just wondering for you, like, when did your vision for what you're creating today really start to formulate? Because I'm sure it wasn't just overnight, but how did you sort of go from, hey, I kind of need this to exist to this is actually slowing me down. Let me move over into this frequency. Like, what was that process like for you?
Well, I had to, first of all, eliminate alcohol for a period of time. Like you just have to take that away entirely. Like that, you have to abstain. Because I realized, because I tried in the past, limiting or reducing intake. Never worked. Okay. Never worked. It worked for a very, very, very short period of time. But sure enough, it was just, I wasn't fully committing to it. And was very good at giving myself excuses. But I also had a mentor of mine say, Dai, because I started sharing these excuses, right, as he was trying to support me. And he says, Dai, you've used that excuse a few times now. It's not an excuse if you use it more than once. It's just a habit. I was like, oh, you're a dick. I was like, but he was right. He was absolutely correct. And I started to look at just my habits. And once I gave up the alcohol and I got my wife to support me, I just wanted her to have that support around the house, and also like going out. And because there are certain things I realized I had to abstain from, like going out to the pub with my buddies to watch USC, because it was just too much associated there. Mm-hmm. Plus, even when I started socializing, all of them kept drinking. I wasn't. 2 rounds in, I was like,
not fun. Yeah.
I can't connect with anybody here. They're not connecting with me. And I started to realize, wow, was I part of these conversations before? Like, whoa. But here's the answer to your question, Jam, was I also realized I didn't have the resources or the understanding of how to move past this and start to realize the actual day-to-day things that I could be doing to start to realize the vision of what I always wanted to be, which was a great father, a great man. And you got to qualify that and quantify it, right? Like you have to spend some time looking inside of yourself and also looking at other examples of great human beings, great men, and figuring out what are the characteristics that make them great. What do we find value in? Because once you get the clarity of that, you can actually start to create a plan or a map to get there. But here's the thing. 6 weeks into this journey without the alcohol, I was like, whoa, I can't do this. Like, that's honestly what I thought. I was like, I can't do that. I mean, maybe I should just quit, give up already. But I remember that I made the commitment to my wife and my daughters that day where I said I was going to go 1 year without drinking. That's all I said. I was just like willing to make a 1 year commitment. I know there's people listening to this like, dude, you sound like an alcoholic. The 1 year is not going to help you. And I was like, no, I felt really confident. If I could cut it for a year, I'd have things under control. But the first 6 weeks, I realized that alcohol becomes such an integral crutch in my life and how I function, that by removing the crutch, I couldn't walk right, metaphorically speaking. It was like I was really challenged to just function and connect. And so I found support through a psychologist as well as a therapist. And the therapist was a couples counselor for my wife and I to work on our communication skills and so we could better connect. But also the psychologist was wonderful because he really helped me figure out what did I truly value, but also what was this thing that kept bringing me back to drinking? Like, why do I want to constantly go to that place and be fun guy Dai, the drinking version of me? And it all tied back to my childhood. And I hate bringing that up because it sounds like a cliche. We hear this all the time, about all those bad things that happen in our adult life is because of stuff that happened to us as a kid. And I used to really fight that and rebel against that concept. But after I actually spent some time on it, I started to realize there's a lot of validation and truth to that.
So real quick,
you
said 6 weeks. That's about 42 days.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, because we've had a guest on before that wrote a book about habit change.
Oh, yeah.
And he says that about 66 days is about how much time you need to change a habit. So you were about 14 days away from that at that point.
Yeah.
Did you see a change 2 weeks later? Like, I'm trying to piece these things together in my mind.
Well, I'll tell you, not hugely, but when I started to have someone to talk to and openly about this, because I got to be honest, guys, I was very challenged to have serious, deep conversations, like very open, emotional conversations. Yep. My dad was very stoic, very introverted. He's also a workaholic. And so, I can remember I can count on 2 hands how many times my dad said he loves me, but to be fair, his parents maybe have said it twice to him in his lifetime, so it was sort of perpetuated. But because of that lack of example of how to connect as a man, I found vulnerability very hard, very challenging. I could do it in the business sense of the conversations, but when it came to personal, I'd been with my wife for 10 years at that point, and we hadn't had a real vulnerable conversation in that time because I wasn't willing to go there. And here I was, 6 weeks in, at this sort of crux point where I was like considering quitting, you know, going back to drinking or continuing to move forward. But my wife and I were sitting on the couch and, you know, and she's looking at me. She's like, what's going on, man? And I could just feel these emotions bubbling up.
Mm.
And I was trying to suppress them because I was really good at suppressing them. And I think that's also what alcohol allowed me to do. It allowed me to ignore that, move past it, have some fun, burn off some steam. So whatever those emotions were, I can just suppress them, press them down again. And it was this constant sort of press them down. Oh, they're starting to come up, drink some more. Oh, can press them down again. And here I was, sober, looking at my wife, about to cry. And I just felt this urge to just tell her everything I was feeling.
Mm.
And it was verbal diarrhea. Like I just all over my wife, okay, for like 40, 45 minutes. And she's, you know, my wife was such a kind listener and generous listener. She put her hand on my lap. I remember this like vividly, you know, she's looking at me. She's like, just nodding and, you know, active listening, like just wonderful. It was exactly what I needed in that moment. I just needed to be heard and acknowledged. And she didn't say anything. And I got to the end of it and I was just like, oh. And she looks at me and she goes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. You know, it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. And I'm looking at her and I'm like, thanks, babe. And then she follows it up with, and this is no joke, I think you should talk to somebody.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. I've had a similar conversation with Alice.
And,
a couple of them.
and in the moment, I was like, I just talked to you. What are you talking about? And
It's like, I
she's
can't
like,
help
think
you
need
with
to
all
talk
that.
Yeah, you need to talk to a professional. You know,
Right.
talk to somebody. And I had such a huge stigma. I don't know. Do you guys ever watch The Sopranos?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
The best.
Do you remember, you know, Tony Soprano's approach to mental health and their whole sort of approach to mental health, especially when he started seeing the psychologist, right? Like psychiatrists, like just that's how I felt about psychology and psychologists, right? Like
There's
I just was
a lot of F that from him.
Yes, yeah,
Psychiatrist,
forget
right?
that.
Yeah, exactly.
And but I said, you know what? I will, because I wanted to change. You know, but I had no idea how to do it, like to sustain it, I should say. And that's what I found that help. And also for anybody listening or watching this right now, and I don't know if you guys have similar experience with these types of mental health professionals, but it wasn't a forever thing. I went all in for 6 months. And I think this is the piece that I've learned through change, is that when you make a decision to change and you follow it up with decisive action, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to happen. It does. Like, it can't help but not happen. You know, like it won't not, like it will be, because you're doing the things that you've always identified you need to do to start to see the change. And now you're actually taking action with that. So I went all in, just like I went all in at 15 with my fitness change. I changed my nutrition. I changed my fitness, you know, and I just was consistent and frequent with that. And sure enough, 2 years later, I was a healthy, fit guy.
Yeah.
My mental health piece wasn't improved, but the physical health was awesome, you know, and same now at 32, going all in with the inner work, the personal development to get the clarity and the confidence. So I knew what actions to take, as well as stop procrastinating, putting off the changes that I wanted to make.
Yeah, I mean, I love this because it centers around everything we talk about on this show. And the reality is you can't lose weight. You can't quit drinking. You can't become a better man and father, better spouse for your wife unless you're ready to make that commitment for yourself. Yes. And we all find our ways to that differently. But obviously your TED Talk around vulnerability in 2021 was tip of the spear stuff. I mean, a lot of people are talking about that today in 2023, but you were talking about this 2 years ago. Congratulations. That's amazing.
Thanks.
You stepped out in this idea of masculinity way before a lot of other people felt comfortable. And that's a big deal, right? And so our ability as humans to understand that for ourselves, and we talk about this all the time, while it might sound selfish that we have to talk to someone else for ourselves to get it right, the reality is nothing's going to change unless we commit to it as ourselves. And that's where this whole idea of me total for us has come, is that you can't have a different relationship with alcohol. You can't have better connectedness with your kids or your wife or your colleagues or your friends and community like on this show unless you're feeling good about who you are in your heart about yourself and about all the decisions that we're making. Right. And so I just love this story. I think it's so many parallels to all the things we talk about. There's a song right now, I'm sure you guys have heard this, with Darius Rucker just laid a verse on it by I think Dax. It's called "To Be a Man," And the end of Darius Rucker's verse, which I'm like crying the first time I heard it, it says, "There's so many screaming on the inside, but won't even let it out." So there's so many men out there that feel the way that you did, Dai, in that moment, and you ultimately gave it all to your wife in that 45 minutes, that are just keeping it in, right? And we all have those stories and all have those experiences. And what we're trying to create on this show is a community and a fellowship of people that want to let you be vulnerable, whether you're men or women, or to your point that it's a human thing, and ultimately putting it out there, putting yourself in a position that you're a bit vulnerable and maybe don't sound like the man that you're supposed to because of the stoicness of your dad. That's okay. We're here for you. So I really appreciate that story, man.
JM, let me talk to the audience real quick. You're listening to the FUZZEE'ish podcast, the Kind of Sober Show. We're here with Dai Manuel. Go to FUZZEEishpodcast.com to check out all of our episodes, including this one. And Mrs. Manuel just dropped the dime of the year. You should probably see a psychologist if you need to see a psychologist.
You just go talk to somebody if you need to.
So let's pivot a little bit, because I want to start getting into the wanderlust phase of the Manuel clan. And I know that topic is going to hit home for Mr. Human up here. So describe to us, how did you wind up in Bali, and why did you come back to North America?
Yeah, well, it wasn't my first choice, but I did come back. And well, let's put it this way. When you go through that drastic period of change, like, here's the thing. When I said no more to alcohol, I created so much space to say yes to a bunch of other things I wanted to do. You know, because you don't realize how much energy goes into the drinking, especially the recovery. Okay. Like I was finding that, you know, usually I'd lose a couple days after an all-nighter, right? Like I just would. I'd lose 48 to 72 hours. I was very unproductive, felt really low. My fitness would falter. Like just everything would sort of fall apart, and I'd have to reset. And then, you know, go for a couple days, and then again, boom. And so it was this sort of 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. So I really didn't feel like I was advancing at all, which is hard. But then the cool part was, as soon as I created the habit of no more drinking, you know, because I went through that first year, at the end of the year, I looked at my wife, I was like, you know what? I had so much change this 1 year. What if I kept going?
Yeah, let's go. I love it.
I don't know. Exactly. And so I kept going, you know, even to today, it's still going. And what happened was I realized going through those changes that I started to get really clear on the things that I wanted to do with my life. And this is scary. And I want to full disclosure on this, because when you go through this process, and I'm sure you guys have similar stories, you go through this, you gain a lot of the clarity because a little of the brain fog starts to go away, right? A lot of those feelings start to get more clear. Plus, we start to see what's possible with these clear eyes, you know? And I realized the path that I was on at that moment, you know, scaling a company. I'd been there for 17 years, you know? It wasn't like I was thinking, I honestly thought this is it. You know, I was a COO, CMO, and I was being groomed to be the CEO. My business partner was 20 years my senior. So he was like already thinking like, I'm getting ready to retire. His kids are almost done university at that point. And he's thinking, oh, I'm going to give you the keys and you can run this thing for a while, you know? And I honestly thought that's what I wanted for so many years. And then all of a sudden I got the sobriety. I get all these changes in that year. And I realized, holy crap, I don't want his life anymore. Because I realized that's what I was attracted to. All his success. Being 20 years my senior, I saw all the things that he had done. And I envisioned that was going to be my life too. And I started realizing I don't want his life. I want my own. And I came to a realization that the career I was in and this path was not going to get me there. And so it's scary, right? Because now it's like, oh, geez, I've got my family to think about. You know, we've got a life here in Vancouver. We've got, you know, my 2 kids are in school. My wife's got her career. You know, like things are really stable. And from everybody out there looking in, you know, they're thinking life's great for us. And meanwhile, we were feeling like things are missing. There was things that we wanted to do. My wife is the one with the major travel bug. She always did. And I was the one that got her in her early 20s to give up travel to stay with me. You know, because I had a career and I wasn't willing to leave. She was willing to stay. And meanwhile, she came back from travel. She was always going away for a year and then she'd come back for some time to save some money and then she'd go traveling again. And so we sort of had this on-off relationship for about 18 months. And then she eventually came back and off we went to having this life together. But I always promised, because she said right from the beginning, I'd love to have, as my kids get older, I'd like to be a traveling family for a period of time. I kind of remembered that, but not really. But she remembered it, and she reminded me of it, and she would send me podcasts frequently. You know, she'd send me, "Oh, give this a listen. There's a guy here that was, you know, running his own company, da 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 da." And then him and his family, they left, and now they're digital nomads. And I'm like, "Yay!" You know, like, woo! But she was dripping on me, and all of a sudden I got to a place where I was like, I keep saying no, 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 we can't, and I started thinking, well, why not? Why not? You know, that feels more aligned with who I'm becoming now, because I had started doing a lot of things online also at the same time. I started building communities online, serving communities, but I had no intention to monetize what I was doing online because I was getting so much fulfillment from it. Plus, I had my existing company that was paying me very well. So there was no need to do anything online other than just give stuff away and help people. And I loved it. It made me feel so good, so good. And all of a sudden, you know, I had a friend of mine in digital marketing start looking at my platform, and he's like, "Dude, are you making any money with this?" And I'm like, "Dude, you can make money with this?" You know? And he's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Well, how?" And then I was turned on to Gary Vaynerchuk's book, you know, Crush It. First edition, you know, I remember reading it on a flight from Vancouver to Toronto. And when I came back, everything changed for me, you know, from that book. And we started putting in motion this plan that within 20 months, I would exit out, you know, or like leave. Well, originally I was thinking of leaving just for 1 year, but then by the time we got there, I was like, no, I'm gone forever. I'm not coming back to this. My wife, a month after I quit my gig, she quit hers. 2 months after that, we pulled the kids out of school. You know, it's like late fall at that point, and everyone is like, what the hell are you guys doing? You know, like we started giving our stuff away. We basically threw a bunch of stuff in storage that had those emotional, you know, value. And then we packed up the SUV, and at the same time, I'd been writing a book during that final 18 months at Fitness Town, you know, the former company. And right at the same time that the book was being released and published, that's when we decided to go south and start our road trip as a family. We had no itinerary, no idea of where we were going to go, what we were going to do. But I mean, it was like winter in Vancouver. It's wet, snowy, and cold. We were like, we want the sun. So we just started going south. Okay. Like we just went south. We ended up in California, spent a bunch of months traveling around the US and then Canada in the summer again. And we were just experiencing life. And I was starting to figure out how to make money online at the same time. We didn't have a lot of savings. So I want people to know it's not like we had an inordinate amount of money. I also exited out of the company, not at a good time, but I didn't care. I was done. You know, I was done. I don't want to be here anymore. So I was like, I'll just cut my losses and let it be. Well, moving on. My dad was sick, very sick. He had pancreatitis, and then it eventually evolved and progressed into pancreatic cancer. And we knew that it was just a matter of time. And that's why predominantly for the first couple of years, we stayed in North America in our travels. He got sick. We went back to Ontario, just outside of Toronto, and we lived there for 6 months during his end of life. And again, you know what? The universe helps in certain ways. As much as we were uncertain of the path we were on, had I not exited out of that company, my old role, and my wife left and pulled the kids out of school, we would not have had that flexibility to take 6 months to spend with my dad at that end of life. So, you know, there's always that silver lining at times. And I'm very grateful for that. But after my dad passed, like within 4 weeks, my wife and I are looking at each other. It's like, we've talked about going overseas.
What are we doing here?
Do we want to go? And we're like, sure. Why don't? My wife had always spoken positively about Indonesia and Southeast Asia. And also cost of living, quality of life, the weather, you know, there's like check, right? And it's like you do the pros and cons, right? Like, you know, the old pro and con sheet, you know, like I had all pros. There was like no cons. There was like none. And so we decided, let's go to Bali for 3 months. We'll have that as a home base. We rented a place on Airbnb, sight unseen. So as soon as we got there, we went to that villa. We loved it. We were having a good time. We got to the end of 3 months and we're like, getting ready to move back to Vancouver. And we're like, why are we going back? You know, and my wife's looking at me, she goes, I don't know. We don't really need to. And I'm like, well, why don't we stay here for a bit? So we did come back for 2 months just to tie up some loose ends. Then we went back to Bali. And 2 and a bit years later, you know, because my kids, we always said, if you want to finish high school in Vancouver, we will honor that. sure enough, they played the card. and so we came back. My daughter had a couple years left. My youngest daughter had to finish out her 4 years. And, now they're both off at university. We're newly empty nesters. And now we're like, where are we going to go next? But that was really the arc there of how we came into travel, but how we ended up in Southeast Asia. And I got to tell you, like, if you have an opportunity to go to Southeast Asia and you haven't been, put it on the list. It's a wonderful place, and there's so many great communities of people to connect with there. And I had no idea of any of that before I started traveling. But as soon as you start, if you're open to connecting with like other nomadic and other people that are into this lifestyle, there's so many of them out there. It's ridiculous. I had no idea until I was part of it,
Real quick question on the culture of that, though, like being somebody that's in your case very traditionally sober.
Mm-hmm.
How is it like going into these different countries? Like, is there other people that are pursuing wellness like you were and kind of kicking those habits? Like, how did you find your tribe?
Yeah, Bali was really interesting because also, for those that don't know, Indonesia is largely Muslim. And because of that, I mean, they don't drink.
Yeah.
And alcohol is heavily taxed. Heavily. Like yellowtail wine from Australia, right? Like they I don't know, they're like what, $6 or $7 a bottle kind of thing. It would be $60 in Bali.
Wow.
Okay, just to like, it's like you 10x the alcohol. So if you're a drinker, you can drink the Bintang, which is like their version of Corona, right? Nice and cheap, but it's like I don't know. Do you guys know British humor? Like, have you ever heard of Monty Python?
Oh yeah.
Sure.
Well, not to put to dish any digs here towards us, nice Americans. But I got to tell you, there was this old joke by Monty Python where they would say, drinking American draft is like making love in a canoe.
Right.
It's effing close to water. Right? And so Bintang, Corona, they're all similar, right? And so being a non-drink over there was really easy because a lot of people were adapting to that lifestyle. A lot of people are very health orientated there in Bali. I mean, you can't help it. It's very healthy living, very low stress. I mean, I had a little bit of a bad habit. It was a massage habit. I was doing like 4 a week. But I mean, the $8 a massage, it was like, it's not going to break the bank. It's all good. It's one of the things I miss the most. A couple gym memberships, like there's great yoga, there's surfing. I mean, it's just a wonderful lifestyle. But because of that lifestyle, you tend to meet a lot of cool little groups of people. And the easiest way to do that is look for the co-working spaces initially.
Right.
Because the co-working spaces is the hub where everybody meets.
Yeah.
And there's tons all the time. There's free events. Doesn't matter what country we go to. Once you find the one of my favorites was the dojo. Unfortunately, it's closed during the pandemic. It closed and never reopened, but it was a wonderful co-working space. They had events every day, a couple events. So they were great mixers and they were free to attend. So that's what I started with. Also, I found Toastmasters. They were running Toastmasters. There was 2 clubs in Bali. By the time I left, there was 4 clubs, one of which I helped start. And I got roped into being a president of one club in particular. But I loved it, because it was another way for me to connect with other people. And then eventually started a men's group as well. Because I'm the kind of guy too, if I can't find a community, I'm just going to build one.
Right.
I'm not afraid to do that. I've done that a lot. And it's fun. Right. So that I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a great place to go.
Of course. And fast forwarding to now, like knowing that we're gonna have to wrap up in a little bit. What do you got going on in your life right now? What do you want to kind of school our audience on? Like what's going on in Dai Manuel's life?
Well, I'm taking a page out of your guys' book. I'm finally about to launch a podcast. Finally,
there you go. All right.
Finally,
I expect an invite in my email address. So one of these days,
each of you are getting one. I want to interview each of you individually because I'm not doing a panel yet. But I know each of your stories are just amazing. So look forward to that. But I'm finally doing that. And it's something I've been wanting to do for 5 years, but just haven't made it a priority based on other projects. But now being an empty nester, I have the time and I have the space, and I'm excited about it. Also I'm launching a new community, a new website. So there's all these new things coming out. And again, I'm just feeling excited to get back into creation mode. I feel that I lost a lot of steam during COVID. I full admitted to that. I saw my business, 60% of my forecasted revenue in that first year drop, like just gone. Because I couldn't, in my right mind, charge my clients to continue to work with them when they were then looking down the barrel of a gun and seeing their revenues also fall off, And so it took a little while to come back from that. It took about 8 months to rebuild and get back to where I was. But I'm now in that place where I'm ready to get back to creating, connecting, and just really trying to build something of value for people. So that's what's going on for me right now. So thanks for asking, Joey.
Super cool. So, what's the premise of the podcast? Let's talk. What's the stage you're going to take with this 5-year kickoff?
Well, it's called the 2% Solution. The book I wrote a number of years ago, it's called The Whole Life Fitness Manifesto. And it's all about teaching people how to use 2% of every 24 hours. I know you're all doing the math right now in your head. It's 30 minutes a day, by the way. And so I find it's easier for me to get people to commit to doing 2% of their day to dedicate to their own self-development. And what I mean by that, it's 15 minutes of movement of purpose, 5 minutes of mindful meditation, immediately followed up with 10 minutes of intentional personal development. So this is where we listen to a great podcast like yours. Maybe we listen to an Audible book, we talk to a mentor, but we spend 10 minutes really focusing on putting positive inputs in. Dude, because I can honestly say for anybody out there that's frustrated with lack of progress in their life, you got to look at what are the inputs. Because the inputs influence the outputs. I mean, this is science 101, right? The scientific method. You got to gauge the inputs to gauge the outputs. And so the 2% Solution is just that. I'm interviewing people to share that crux moment in their life where they realize that consistent little habit that they've been doing so frequently has created massive shift for them in their life.
Joey, is this the segue to the product and practice, man? I mean,
it could be.
Before we do that, Dai is sharing some incredible stuff. Really cool to have you here. But I want to just go back just a bit. You talked about that moment when your wife sort of sat you down and just asked you if you're being the type of man that you would, want your daughter to be with, or your daughters to be with. And as you've been talking, you've been speaking a lot about just examples of good men, or just that community to sort of take on this new role of being sober, living this Me Total lifestyle. So one of the pillars of Me Total is fellowship. Again, you talked about creating this new community, and this isn't fellowship from necessarily a religious view. It's more from just a communal space. But I'm just curious for you, you talked about developing this new community, but along the way, where have you found that? Has that been a big part of what you've done? Because it sounds like you haven't done this alone. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll give credit always to where credit is due. And the people that I've been able to connect with and associate with, but also just really become friends. It's been so essential to my development as a human, as a man, getting around other great men that I feel are doing things that are in alignment to my values. I know by being associating with them, good things are going to happen. Because it's instant accountability, but it's also just easy. It's easy, right? Because we're normalizing certain habits, and they're good habits. We're not normalizing the other stuff. We're really focused on the positive. But it's nice to always have these other examples. But this fellowship comment that you made, I think, is so critical, because if people, especially men, men that are struggling, that are listening to this or watching this, women got it figured out. I mean, women, they can connect and talk about anything. Us men, not so much, right? Like, it's not exactly role model, but I think it's going to change, and it is changing because of platforms like what you guys have built. You're normalizing the conversation, you're reducing the stigmatization, you're making it more acceptable to talk about this stuff, but still having a community where you can have those vulnerable conversations in a safe space, where what is shared there is going to stay there. That was instrumental in the last 5 years of my life. Like in me getting to where I am now, especially mentally, physically, and emotionally, and spiritually, because you start to develop these really deep relationships, because you start to realize when you start opening up about things that you're challenged by, and there's three other men on the other side of that table looking back at you, putting up their hands like, me too. You start to realize, like, why did I take 20 years to talk about this problem?
Right.
Here, I thought no one would understand me because I was alone with this issue, and here there are three guys right across the table who got this exact same challenge, and maybe they've worked their way through it already. And so there's that mentorship opportunity to learn from others, that's why we started mentorship meetups. It was just this idea of bringing men together, meetups very specifically to connect in a vulnerable way, but also a respectful way. And I think that's essential, It's been essential for my life. And I think anybody that has this similar experience would also agree to that.
Have you ever read the book From Strength to Strength? Either listened or read Arthur Brooks? So it's basically about the second. It's about having a positive second half of life, which at least all of us are close to, if not already in. And it's got at one point it talks about 7 things to do your best to have a happy, well life at 80. And the 7 are things you would probably obviously answer: no smoking, good relationship with alcohol, healthy body weight, exercise your mind too, coping mechanism of conflict. And then the 7th is relationships, and strong ones, and not just your spouse. And then he goes on to say, even though it's number 7, the strength of relationships is actually the most important. In fact, the men in particular that have the best relationships at 50 end up having the most happy and well life at 80. And I think, man, you paralleled that pretty closely. And I'm a huge subscriber even before listening to you say that, but maybe a good audible.
Well, this is a
You've been
good
holding out on
transition.
that book, JM.
Wait,
That's
one
the first
sec,
time
one
I heard
sec.
you mention that.
I got to say, if you guys are familiar with Dan Buttner, Dr. Dan Buttner.
Sure.
Yeah. So the blue zones, if you look at the power 9, right? Like it echoes and lines up with everything you just said. And now here's people in those 5 pockets living to be 100 plus, and they're not just like waiting to die, right? Like they're active, they're thriving,
getting after it. Yeah.
They're getting after it. They're a lot of them are living independently still, right? Like if we look at that, I think that's also just a wonderful example that will confirm what you just said, because it's like proved, there's some great documentation to support, but it's all basic stuff. It's not stuff that costs money, it's all stuff that's accessible.
All right, time out.
Yeah.
We're getting into some really good products and practices here. So we've got 2 more segments to get through before we let you go on your way, Dai. Products and practices, and we've got a new segment. So bringing it back to your methodology that you're trying to espouse and trying to get people to follow into. Some people might be sitting back and thinking, well, yeah, but I don't have enough time to even 30 minutes, even 10 minutes to practice something different. I would argue just because I could go on a 30-minute rant all alone on how much negative news we're consuming every day. So real quick to our listeners out there, you do have time. I know you're listening to the Daily, you're listening to like all these podcasts, and nothing against our fellow podcasters out there that are doing a fantastic job, but you could take 10 minutes away from the toxic sludge that is the American political news system out there to consume something positive. You can, and I'll go first since I've got some ready-made stuff here on my desk. And I won't get into the religious stuff, guys. I know you guys think I'm just going to pull the Bible out, but I'm not. My buddy Jason Donnelly published Cold Feet, which talks about how he froze his midlife crisis off. He lost a lot of weight by moving to Denmark and doing cold plunges all the time. Wow. So there's a lot of ways you can pivot your habits just slightly to make yourself not forget about the lifestyle that you used to live, but put yourself into more of a positive habit mentality to go along with the fitness and the eating right and stuff like that. So, Dai, from your perspective, what are some of those things that you do to, when you're going through that 30-minute journey and then you're down to the 10 minutes to do something positive for yourself, consume something positive that you're consuming?
I like Audible books because one thing I love to do as far as I like to get into my own body, and I love walking. It's one thing that's one of the things why I love Vancouver. It's a very walking, pedestrian friendly city. Let's just put it that way. There's lots of beautiful places to walk. And so I'll throw on my headset, and I'll put on an Audible book and I'll walk. Right now I'm re-listening to The Way of the Superior Man by David Deida. Great book, wonderful resource for those that are looking for something. It's really interesting. I know my wife, when she first saw the title, she was like, what chauvinistic piece of crap is this? I'm like, babe, that's not what it means. Take a look at this. Just read the first chapter. She's read the first chapter. She's like, oh, this is nice. I like this, so wonderful resource. And then on top of that, it's just connecting with certain guys that I know will call me out. Like I have low days and I'm part of this men's group. There's only like 5 of us in it. And we have a WhatsApp feed, and we meet every 2 weeks for a face-to-face over Zoom or whatnot. But during those 2 weeks before we meet, if we ever have a challenge or a low day, we have certain keywords that we'll post in the WhatsApp group which will signal that we're having a low moment. And that's where the other 4 guys will come to that moment to support, to help, to help us through that, because we all know there's going to be the highs and lows in just life. And so it's nice knowing that you have that support network. And just even a quick 2-minute check-in with those guys is enough. Mm-hmm. It's enough for me to just feel, I'm not alone. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to get through this. And I've got these guys that I can rely on if I need help.
Gotcha.
You know, and that's one of the little things. Those are 2 little habits that are instrumental to me just regulating a little bit more effectively, you know?
Cool. Carrie, JM, do you have examples that you want to bring to the table this week?
I mean, I think for me, I love what you just shared, Dai. I just finished reading a book that I read a while back called The 5 a.m. Club by Robin Sharma. Really good book. If you haven't heard of it, but essentially it just talks about sort of the power of the morning, especially the early mornings. My wife and son are traveling now, so they're not here. But generally when they're here, it's, you know, pretty much when everyone's up, it's hard to get stuff done. So just finishing that and just recalling, for me, getting up a little bit earlier so that I can, you know, meditate, exercise, and journal. I just feel like having that as a foundation really just sort of, I don't know, everything else that happens in the day, it's like you said, like you're going to have your highs and lows. But I think for me, it's not panicking when things get crazy, just still being able to walk into it with a breath. Also just knowing that I have some great people around me to, just keep me grounded. That's been really helpful for me lately.
Powerful.
Yeah, no, same. I think that book From Strength to Strength just got done. I'm an Audible guy too. I like to do it while I'm moving my body versus reading the words. I sometimes have it in both formats at the same time. So definitely still all about that. Also just had some challenging stuff happening personally with one of my family members and kind of around this topic, and have been able to connect to a few people that kind of give it to me real. I like the way that you said that, because especially as you get to a certain point in your life and even a certain success in business or in your professional life, people don't necessarily give it to you straight. And it's important. And I hold both Joe and Carrie to this esteem. They'll give it to me straight when necessary. And then I have a couple buddies who have known me my whole life, who one in particular after my bachelor party basically said, dude, I don't even want to be in your wedding after how you acted, which is such an, sort of an important part of our story on this show that we've never even really talked about. I was just such an idiot with alcohol. But I talked to him this week about this other thing, and he just lost his grandmother too. And it's so interesting how quickly you can reconnect with people that have been that fiber of your life through trial and tribulation, but also success. And it's just such a reminder of how important relationships are, both the good ones and the bad ones, but also just keeping those solid. One other thing, Dai, you said in your TEDx about I left the conversation feeling better than when I arrived. Mm-hmm. And man, I think that's such a powerful thing. And I feel the same about today's conversation. So thanks a lot for your time.
It's so funny, and I'll leave the audience with a quick little anecdote. There's no author that I want to cite here or anything like that, but I've been talking to my wife a lot lately because I've been seeing this both pop up in, scientific conversations as well as spiritual conversations. The fact that your brain can't respond to anxiety and gratitude at the same time. It's one or the other. It's binary. So if you want to flush out anxiety and stress, you just think about the things you're grateful for, right? So because your brain doesn't have space to do both of those activities. So it's something to keep in mind. There's a reason why gratitude journals are a thing, right?
True.
And it sounds like what all of us are kind of connecting on is, right, even in tough times, we still have so much stuff to be grateful for. Something I'm grateful for is going on the internet and seeing examples of celebrities that are talking about their sobriety date anniversaries.
That's cool.
I hope the audience can see Dai's face. If you're not watching this, make sure you turn on the visual so you can see it.
So BuzzFeed, they published an article based on Jessica Simpson's Instagram post recently. So I'm bringing it to Jessica Simpson. So I don't know if you guys have seen this article recently. If not, go check it out on BuzzFeed right now while we're talking. She posted a picture of herself from 6 years ago right before she quit drinking alcohol. Unrecognizable. Like seriously, you cannot recognize who that person is from the old like Nick and Jessica days on trashy reality TV and stuff like that. But now she looks much more like her former self. In fact, she probably looks better than she's ever looked in her life. She's 6 years sober. So kudos to Jessica Simpson. That's around how much time I've been off of alcohol. But just knowing that a lot of us here have with the exception of Carrie, the chiseled Greek god over there in the right-hand corner of my screen, have battled weight issues and appearance issues. What do you have to say to those people that, are posting some of these before and after photos, their journey with sobriety, journey with being alcohol free, and how it's really transformed their appearance? I mean, obviously you do this for a living, but what can you offer to the audience? Like that to me, that's incredible. Like I look at her and she looks so healthy, and it's amazing.
Well, I think it's so. Yeah, this is I'm trying to be sensitive to this, and why I'm bringing this up, and we're more than just who we are physically, right? And I think we're all in agreement to that. And I want people to recognize that the well-being and health is the benefit to making the change.
It's the byproduct.
It is. That is just, but it's not the reason why we do it. Because I honestly feel the reason why we want to do it should be so much more than just the physical.
Sure.
It has to be tied into everything that makes us up, our DNA, those values. Like it's aligning with values. When you align with your values, it's amazing how effortless things can feel at times. We hear about people, they talk about flow states or being in the zone, right? Like when we're feeling good, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, it's incredible how we can sort of just navigate the challenges in life because our natural resiliency is just more present. It's activated, right? Like, and the funny thing is resiliency is in all of our DNA as human beings. I mean, there's like almost 8 billion of us on this planet, and it's not by accident. And we're living in some pretty harsh conditions in certain parts, but yet people are thriving, right? And so I think sometimes it's just remembering that we have this ability to handle hard things and to do hard stuff and to do different things, and having that confidence that, hey, it's okay, just get started. But the cool thing is, you are going to gain a lot of health benefits by making that change. You are going to look better. Your skin's going to clear up, especially. That's one of the first things that happens, especially if you're drinking lots of water to flush the system. At the same time, when you're detoxing and coming off alcohol, got to replace with a lot of water, add a little bit of lemon in there even. And it'll be amazing at how quickly your physical appearance will start to change. Plus you flush all that inflammation. So instantly, I know I have clients, I'll get them like within 30 days. They've lost like as much as like 20 pounds. And they're like, wow, I've lost 20 pounds. I'm like, hey, most of that was water, just so you know. And it's because we're so inflamed, right? From alcohol. That's what it does. We retain a ton of fluids. So instantly, within 30 days of just saying no to alcohol, I guarantee whoever you are, you're going to feel better. When you start feeling better, you're going to think differently. When you start thinking differently, you're just going to start living life differently.
Well, I don't think it's all about vanity. She did mention in the article that one of the main reasons she quit drinking was because it came to a crescendo when she couldn't get her kids dressed for Halloween, and that made her feel worse than the physical appearance. So similar to like a lot of us, when you look in the mirror and you decide, is this the person is this the parent you want to be? Is this the dad? Is this the mom? Is this the brother? Is this the sister? It's those moments transcend the bad photo, right?
Yeah.
And so kudos to Jessica and her journey. Jessica, if you're listening, I doubt you're listening, but if you're listening, you want to come on the show, you want to talk about it, you're welcome.
And the reality is you can't.
Just make sure we tag the heck out of her on all 4 of our accounts, right? We'll get her on your show for sure.
You can't visualize how we're feeling in our hearts, right? But the proof is in those pictures that you look at Macaulay Culkin from Addicted to Now, the Jessica Simpson example. It sounds like the Diamond. I certainly know the JMG example from then to now. Post Malone,
I don't think he's completely quit drinking, but he's like he's gone on a little bit.
Dude, he said he had water in his red cup at the CMAs. Water, just to keep the brand. He had his solo cup, but he had sparkling water in it. So good on you, Austin, Post Malone, man. Everybody's out here doing better.
Cool. Well, Dai, it's been a pleasure having you. We really appreciate you. And is there a website or an Instagram handle or TikTok handle you want to point anybody to?
Well, I'm still trying to figure out TikTok. So Instagram's probably better. And it's just my name. If you can spell my name right, you'll find me. It's just Dai, which is a Welsh name for David, by the way. And then my last name's Manuel. So Dai Manuel, you'll find me. I am on all the social networks with the same handle. So I am pretty easy to find. Even my website's daimanuel.com. It's like, if you can spell my name right, you're going to find me. And I always say, reach out to me, but I always apologize in advance, partially because I'm Canadian, but secondly, because I'm a one-man army. I have people that work on my team, but I handle all the communications myself personally.
Good for you.
I'm a
Gotcha.
stickler
Love
for
that.
that stuff. So I just ask, give me a bit of grace. If I don't respond right away, I will get back to you, but it might be a couple days. That's all.
Gotcha.
Well, Dai, I'll just say you may need to hire an assistant, because if you're able to help people lose 20 pounds in 30 days drinking water,
Yeah, exactly.
you know.
Oh, walking and drinking water. But you'll be surprised if you're quite overweight and you've been drinking a lot for a while. It's everyone can experience a similar sort of weight loss. Maybe not 20 pounds. The gentleman that I was working with, he was in the high 200s. So just so you know, we're not talking like he was losing 30% of his body weight. It was a smaller segment. So
Gotcha.
Full disclosure.
Dai, thanks for coming along.
Hey, dude.
Thank you, Dai.
Really
Thank you,
appreciate
guys.
you, man.
Appreciate you.
Thank you all for just creating
Yeah,
this
man.
platform, creating and capturing these conversations. I know if I could go back 14 years ago to that crux moment when my wife asked me that question, my journey would have been very different had I had access to a resource like this.
God bless you for
And
that.
so I just want to say
you.
thank you. No, thank you.